The T-80 is a third-generation main battle tank, MBT, designed and manufactured in the Soviet Union. When it entered service in 1976, it was the first MBT in the world to feature a powerful multi-fuel turbine engine as its main propulsion engine. The T-80U was last produced in a factory in Omsk, Russia, while the T-80UD and further developed T-84 continue to be produced in Ukraine. The T-80 and its variants are in service in Belarus, Cyprus, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Russia, South Korea, and Ukraine. The chief designer of the T-80 was the Russian engineer Nikolai Popov. Development history. The project to build the first Soviet turbine-powered tank began in 1949. Its designer was A.C.H. Starostenko, who worked at the Leningrad Kirov plant, LKZ. The tank was never built because available turbine engines were of very poor quality. In 1955, two prototype 1000 HP, 746 kilowatts, turbine engines were built at the same plant under the guidance of G.A. Ogloblin. 2 years later, a team led by the famous heavy tank designer Joseph Kodin constructed two prototypes of the Obyunite 278 tank. Both were hybrids of the IS-7 and the T-10 heavy tanks, powered by the GTD-1 turbine engine, weighing 53.5 tons and armed with the M65 130mm tank gun. The turbine engine allowed the tank to reach a maximum speed of 57.3 km per hour, 35.6 miles per hour, however with only 1,950 liters of fuel on board, range was 300 km, 190 miles. The two tanks were considered experimental vehicles and work on them eventually ceased. In 1963, the Morozov Design Bureau designed the T-64 and T-64T tanks. They used GTD-3TL turbine engines which generated 700 HP, 522 kilowatts. The tank was tested until 1965. At the same time, at Uralvagonzavod, a design team under the guidance of L.N. Kartsev created the Obyunite 167T tank. It used the GTD-3T turbine engine which supplied 801 HP, 597 kilowatts. In 1966 the experimental Obyunite 288 rocket tank, powered by two aerial GTD-350 turbine engines with a combined power of 691 HP, 515 kilowatts, was first built. Trials indicated that twin propulsion was no better than the turbine engine which had been in development since 1968 at KB3 of the Kirov plant, LKZ, and at WNII Transmash. The tank from LKZ equipped with this turbine engine was designed by Nikolai Popov. It was constructed in 1969 and designated Obyunite 219 SP1. It was renamed the T-64T, and was powered by a GTD 1000T multi-fuel gas turbine engine producing up to 1000 HP, 746 kilowatts. During the trials it became clear that the increased weight and dynamic characteristics required a complete redesign of the vehicle's Caterpillar track system. The second prototype, designated Obyunite 219 SP2, received bigger drive sprockets and return rollers. The number of wheels was increased from 5 to 6. The construction of the turret was altered to use the same compartment, 125mm 2A46 tank gun, auto-loader, and placement of ammunition as the T-64A. Some additional equipment was scavenged from the T-64A. The LKZ plant built a series of prototypes based on Obyunite 219 SP2. After 7 years of upgrades, the tank became the T-80. Description: the T-80 is similar in layout to the T-64, the driver's compartment is on the center line at the front, the two-man turret is in the center with gunner on the left and commander on the right, and the engine is rear-mounted. Overall, its shape is also very similar to the T-64. The original T-80 design uses a 1000 horsepower gas turbine instead of a 750 horsepower diesel engine, although some later variants of the T-80 revert to diesel engine usage. The gearbox is different, with 5 forward and 1 reverse gear, instead of 7 forward and 1 reverse. Suspension reverts from pneumatic to torsion bar, with 6 forged steel aluminium rubber-tired road wheels on each side, with the tracks driven by rear sprockets. The glacis is of laminate armor and the turret is armored steel. The turret houses the same 125 mm 2A46 smoothbore gun as the T-72, which can fire anti-tank guided missiles as well as regular ordnance. The tracks are slightly wider and longer than on the T-64, giving lower ground pressure. The main gun is fed by the Cortina automatic loader. This holds up to 28 rounds of 2-part ammunition in a carousel located under the turret floor. Additional ammunition is stored within the turret. The ammunition comprises the projectile, APFS, heat or HE-frag, plus the propellant charge, or the 2-part missile. The auto-loader is an effective, reliable, combat-tested system which has been in use since the mid-1960s. The propellant charge is held inside a semi-combustible cartridge case made of a highly flammable material. This is consumed in the breech during firing, except for a small metal baseplate. A disadvantage highlighted during combat in Chechnya was the vulnerability of the T-80BV to catastrophic explosion. The reason given by US and Russian experts is the vulnerability of stored semi-combustible propellant charges and missiles when contacted by the molten metal jet from the penetration of a heat warhead, causing the entire ammunition load to explode. This vulnerability may be addressed in later models. When Western tank designs changed from non-combustible propellant cartridges to semi-combustible, they tended to separate ammunition stowage from the crew compartment with armored blast doors, and provided blowout panels to redirect the force and fire of exploding ammunition away from the crew compartment. The auto-loader takes between 7.1 and 19.5 seconds to load the main weapon, 28 rounds, depending on the initial position of auto-loader carousel. The T-80's armor is composite on the turret and hull, while rubber flaps and side skirts protect the sides and lower hull. The later T-80 models use explosive reactive armor and stronger armor, like the T-80U and T-80UM1. Other protection systems include the Stura 1 and Arena APS, as well as the discontinued Drost APS. The latest T-80 variant in service, the T-84 Oplot, has an entirely new turret with armored ammunition compartment to help prevent accidental detonation. Production history. Initially, the T-80 was confused with the Soviet T-72 by some Western analysts. They are the products of different design bureaus. The T-80 is from the SKB-2 Design Bureau of the Kirov Factory, LKZ, in Leningrad, while the T-72 is from the Uralvagonzavod Factory in Nizhny Tagil, Russia. They are similar in superficial appearance, but the T-80 is based on the earlier T-64, while incorporating features from the T-72, which was a complementary design. The T-64 in turn was an earlier high-technology main battle tank, designed by the Morozov Design Bureau, KMDB, to replace the T-54, T-55, and T-62 MBTs, used before in the USSR. From a long distance the T-64, T-72, and T-80 look alike even though the T-80 is 90 cm longer than the T-64. Despite the similarities, the T-80 and T-72 are mechanically very different. The T-72 is mechanically simpler, easier to manufacture, and easier to service in the field. As such, the T-72 was intended to be a tank mass-produced to equip the bulk of the Soviet motor rifle units, and for sale to export partners and Eastern Bloc satellite states. The T-80 design improved in several points upon the earlier T-64 design, introducing a gas turbine engine in the original model, which was denied for many years by Western analysts, and incorporating suspension components of the T-72. This gave the tank a high power-to-weight ratio and made it easily the most mobile tank in service, albeit with acute range problems, as the turbine consumed fuel rapidly, even at engine idle. Morozov's subsequent parallel development of the T-80UD replaced the gas turbine with a commercial turbodiesel, to decrease fuel consumption and maintenance. In comparison to its anticipated opponent, the M1 has a larger, 1,500 HP, 1,120 kilowatts, gas turbine, but weighs 61 tons compared to the T-80's 42.6 tons, so it has a worse HP/T ratio of 24.5 compared to 27.1 and is less maneuverable than the T80, with GT. The T80 can fire the same 9K112 Cobra, at 8 songster, anti-tank guided missile through the main gun as the T-64. The T-80U main battle tank, 1985, U4 Ulukshini, meaning improvement, was designed by SKB-2 in Leningrad, Hull, and the Morozov Bureau, Turret and Armament. It is a further development of the T-80A and is powered by the 1250 HP, 919 kilowatts, GTD 1250 gas turbine. It is a step ahead of the GTD 1000T and GTD 1000TF engines that were installed on the previous tanks of the T-80 line. This gas turbine can use jet fuels as well as diesel and low-octane gasoline and has good dynamic stability, service life, and reliability. The GTD 1250 has a built-in automatic system of dust deposits removal. It retains the T-80's high fuel consumption, which the Russian army found unacceptable during the Chechen conflicts. It is equipped with the 2A46 fire control system and a new turret. The T-80U is protected by a second generation of explosive reactive armor called Contact 5, which can severely dissipate the penetrative capabilities of an APFSTS round, such as the M829A1 Silver Bullet. The Contact 5 is integrated into the design of the turret, hull, and broad deep weighting equipment. Like all of the previous T-80 models, the T-80U has full-length rubber side skirts protecting the sides, with those above the first 3 road wheels being armored and are provided with lifting handles. It can fire the 9M119 Reflex, at 11 sniper, guided missile and the long rod penetrator, HVAPFSTS, 3BM46. The remotely controlled commander's machine gun was replaced by a more flexible pintle-mounted one. A special camouflage paint distorts the tank's appearance in the visible and IR wave bands. The T-80U's 1A46 fire control system includes a laser range finder, a ballistics computer, and a more advanced 1G46 gunner's main sights, as well as thermal imaging sights, which greatly increases the T-80's firepower over previous models. These new systems, together with the 125mm D81 trademark Rapira 3 smoothbore gun, ensure that the T-80U can accurately hit and destroy targets at a range of up to 5 km, ATGMs and HV/APFSTS. An experienced crew at the international exhibition was able to successfully strike 52 targets without a miss at a distance of 5 km using guided rockets. The T-80U, M, of the 1990s introduced the TO1PO2, a gave a gunner's thermal imaging sight and 9M119M Reflex M guided missile, and later an improved 2A46M4 version of the 125mm gun and 1G46M gunner's sight was used. Perhaps because of the turbine-powered tank's high fuel consumption, and the poor combat performance of older T-80BV tanks in the early days of the war in Chechnya, the Russian army decided to standardize on the Uralvagonzavod factory's T-90 tank, derived from the T-72BM, but incorporating some T-80 technology, and have had some success selling it to the Indian Army. All T-72s, T-80s, and even the T-90 are to be replaced starting in 2025 by a new Russian tank, the T-14 Armata. The Omsk tank plant in Siberia is facing a shortage of domestic orders, unlike the Ukrainians who embraced the T-80 design and have had success updating and selling the tank. The Russians have only sold a small number of T-80 tanks to South Korea and China, and have demonstrated versions intended for export, including the T-80UM1 with active protection systems, and the advanced T-80UM2 Black Eagle concept tank. Although the T-80 production has stopped for the Russian army, the Omsk plant still makes the tank for export. Ukrainian T-80UD. In parallel with the T-80U in Russia in general, the Morozov Bureau in Ukraine developed a diesel-powered version, the T-80UD. It is powered by the 1,000 HP 6TD1 6-cylinder multi-fuel 2-stroke turbo piston diesel engine, ensuring high fuel efficiency and a long cruising range. The engine support systems make it possible to operate the tank at ambient temperatures of up to 55 degrees Celsius and ford water obstacle 1.8 m in depth. The T-80UD shares most of the T-80US improvements, but can be distinguished from it by a different engine deck and distinctive smoke mortar array and turret stowage boxes. It retains the remotely controlled commander's machine gun. About 500 T-80UD tanks were built in the Malyshev plant between 1987 and 1991. About 300 were still at the Ukrainian factory when the Soviet Union broke up, so the T-80UD tank was welcomed into Ukrainian military service, and therefore is more common in Ukrainian service than Russian. The T-84 and Ukraine's older T-80S are to be Ukraine's main battle tanks well into the 21st century. A further development of the T-80UD became the Ukrainian T-84 MBT. It had a new welded turret, a 1,200 HP, 895 kilowatts, 6 TD2 engine, Contact 5 reactive armor, the Shtara active protection system, a thermal imaging sight, a muzzle referencing system, and an auxiliary power unit. In 1999 a new variant, T-84, appeared. This modification got many improvements, including deeper side skirts, modified reactive armor, a small reference radar antenna near the gunner's hatch, used to track rounds and compensate for barrel wear, and a large armored box for an auxiliary power unit at the rear of the right fender. Unlike Russia, Ukraine has had much better success selling T-80S, but not T-84S, to foreign customers. Cyprus bought a number of T-80S for its small army. Pakistan, countering India's adoption of the Russian T-90, bought Ukrainian T-80UDS for its main armored corps of the Pakistani army. The T-84 Oplot, 10 delivered in 2001, introduced turret bustle ammunition storage, and to offer more sales to international market, the T-84-120 Yatagan has been offered for export, featuring a very large turret bustle and NATO-compatible 120mm gun. In 2010, Bangladesh discussed a major purchase of T-84 Yatagans, however finally dropped it in favor of MBT 2000s. In 2011, Azerbaijan announced its intention to buy Ukrainian T-84 Oplots for its ground forces, but subsequently decided to purchase 94 Russian T-90s. T-80 models. This section lists the main models of the T-80, built in the Soviet Union, Russia, and Ukraine, with the dates they entered service. Command tanks with additional radio equipment have K added to their designation for Komandersky, command, for example. T-80BK is the command version of the T-80B. Versions with reactive armor have V added, for Vzrivnoy, explosive, for example T-80BV. Less expensive versions without missile capability have a figure 1 added, as T-80B1. T-80, 1976 initial model, with 1,000 HP gas turbine engine, coincidence rangefinder, and no missile capability. This model does not have fittings for explosive reactive armor. The turret is from the T-64A, and thus retains the use of the old coincidence rangefinder. Characteristics of this type are the V-shaped water deflector on the front glacis, coincidence rangefinder in front of the commander's cupola, and Luna searchlight mounted in the same position as a T-64. Around 250 were produced, as the tank's armor was essentially obsolete when introduced. Turret vs APFSTS, 380 mm, hull vs APFSTS, 500 mm, without reactive armor. This was, in effect, a pre-production model. It reportedly was fitted with an early version of the Shtara APS. T-80B, 1978. This model had a new turret, laser rangefinder, fire control, and auto-loader allowing the firing of 9M112-1 Cobra anti-tank guided missile, 80% hit probability while stopped and on the move, and improved composite armor. An improved, 1,100 HP, engine was added in 1980, a new gun in 1982, and fittings for reactive armor in 1985. Reactive armor added protection of 400 mm equivalent armor to defend against heat warheads. The longest sighting range for T-80B kinetic energy ammunition and for cumulative ammunition, 4000 m, high explosive fragmentation, 5000 m, using the side level, 10,000 m. A night sight TPNZ-49 in active mode reached 1,300 and a passive, 850 m reflex-guided missile complex with laser beam allowed it to launch missiles at any tank speed. T-80BV, 1985 T-80B with explosive reactive armor Contact 1. T-80UM, Russian version, with new Buran thermal imaging sight in place of the Luna IR. Object 219A, early T-80U, Object 219AS, variant. It has the T-80US turret, but not the Contact 5 era. Instead, it uses the old Contact 1/3 system. Some 219AS did not have era at all. Often misnamed T-80A. T-80U, 1985 further development with a better turret, Contact 5 explosive reactive armor, improved gun sight, and 9K119 reflex missile system. In 1990 a new, 1,250 HP, engine was installed. Overall protection with Contact 5 against APFST/heat is 780/1,320 mm Ray. 9K119M with anti-tank guided missile 9M119M installed since 1990. Some of the tanks in Commander version, T-80 UK, equipped with STRA 1 APS, and thermal imaging night sight TO1 PO2T, detection range/target classification range equals 6,400/4,600 meters at night. Basic thermal night sight of the T-80U is within the limits of 1,750/1,500 meters. T-80UD Bereza, 1987 Ukrainian diesel version with 1,000 HP 6TD engine and remote-controlled anti-aircraft machine gun. T-84, 1999 further Ukrainian development of T-80UD with 1,200 HP diesel and new welded turret. T-80BVD, 2002 KMDB's upgrade standard for Ukrainian T-80BVS changes include the 6TD diesel engine, remote-controlled commander's machine gun, and better optics. None were produced. T-80UM2/Black Eagle, prototype, cancelled. Several Russian prototypes were shown at trade shows, with a longer chassis and extra pair of road wheels, and very a large turret with separate ammunition compartment. T-80BVM, 2017 up to 3,000 units, installed relict era, PNM Sosna U gunner sight, as in the T-90, T-72B3, upgrades of various other systems. Service history. Soviet Union. In 1985 there were 1,900 T-80 MBTs overall. According to data publicized in Russia, 2,256 T-80 MBTs, up to the T-80BV model, as T-80Us were never deployed in Europe, were stationed in East Germany between 1986 and 1987. NATO realized that new Soviet tanks could reach the Atlantic within 2 weeks and because of that started to develop counter methods that could stop them. This led to a sudden increase in development of anti-tank weapons including attack helicopters. In 1991, when the Soviet Union was breaking up, the Soviet Army operated 4,839 T-80 MBTs in several different models. T-80 MBTs were never used in the way in which they were intended, large-scale conventional war in Europe. They were deployed during the political and economical changes in Russia in the 1990s. In August 1991, Communists and Allied military commanders tried to overthrow Mikhail Gorbachev and regain control over the unstable Soviet Union. T-80UD tanks of the Russian 4th Guards Kantemirovskaya Tank Division drove onto the streets of Moscow, but the Soviet coup attempt failed when the tank crews refused to attack the audience or the parliament. Russia. While a number of T-80 MBTs were inherited by Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, Russia had possession the majority of the tanks. In 1995 the number of T-80 tanks increased to around 5,000 but was reduced in 1998 to 3,500. The Russian army had 3,044 T-80s and variants in active service and 1,456 in reserve as of 2008. There are at least 460 T-80UD in service with 2nd Guards Tamanskaya Motor Rifle Division and 4th Guards Kantemirovsk Motor Rifle Division. A T-80BV is on display in Kubinka Tank Museum and a T-80U is on display at an open-air museum in Saratov. The T-80s have recently been seen at arms expos in Russia such as VTTV. During the 1993 Russian constitutional crisis, Boris Yeltsin ordered to use tanks against the Supreme Soviet and the Congress of People's Deputies opposing him. On October 4, 1993, 6 T-80 UDMBTs from 12th Guards Tank Regiment, 4th Guards Kantemirovskaya Tank Division took positions on a bridge opposite the Russian Parliament building, and fired on it. In July 1998, a T-80 commanded by Major Igor Belyaev was driven onto a square in front of the administration building of Novosmolensk and its gun aimed at the building in protest of several months of unpaid wages. The T-80's first, and only, use in combat was in 1994 in the First Chechen War, where they suffered heavy losses in urban combat. Due to design flaws and high operating costs, Russia has not used the tanks in later conflicts such as the 1999 Second Chechen War, 2008 Russo-Georgian War, or 2014 Russian intervention in Ukraine. First Chechen War. T-80B and T-80B VMBTs were never used in Afghanistan in the 1980s to maintain the tank's characteristics secret, but they were first used during the First Chechen War. This first real combat experience for T-80 MBTs was unsuccessful, as the tanks were used for capturing cities, a task for which they were not very well suited. The biggest tank losses were suffered during the ill-fated assault on the city of Grozny. The forces selected to capture Grozny were not prepared for such an operation, while the city was defended by, among others, veterans of the Soviet war in Afghanistan. The T-80 tanks used in this operation either did not have reactive armor, T-80B, or they were not fitted with explosive inserts before the start of the operation, T-80BV, and the T-80 crews lacked sufficient training before the war. The inexperienced crews had no knowledge of the layout of the city, while the tanks were attacked by RPG teams hidden in cellars and on top of high buildings. The anti-tank fire was directed at the least armored points of the vehicles. Each destroyed tank received from 3 to 6 hits, and each tank was fired at by 6 or 7 rocket-propelled grenades. A number of vehicles exploded when the autoloader, with vertically placed rounds, was hit. In theory it should have been protected by the road wheel, but, when the tanks got hit on their side armor, the ready-to-use ammunition exploded. Out of all armored vehicles that entered Grozny, 225 were destroyed in the first month alone, representing 10.23% of all the tanks committed to the campaign. The T-80 performed so poorly that General Lieutenant A. Galkin, the head of the Armor Directorate, convinced the Minister of Defense after the conflict to never again procure tanks with gas turbine engines. After that, T-80 MBTs were never again used to capture cities, and, instead, they supported infantry squads from a safe distance. Defenders of the T-80 point out that the T-72 performed just as badly in urban fighting in Grozny as the T-80 and that there were two mitigating factors. After the breakup of the Soviet Union, poor funding meant no training for new Russian tank crews, and the tank force entering the city had no infantry support, which is considered to be suicidal by many major military strategists of armored warfare. Exported T-80s. United Kingdom. In 1992, the United Kingdom bought a number of T-80 UMBTs for defense research and development. They were not bought officially but through a specially created trading company which was supposed to deliver them to Morocco. The price of $5 million offered for each tank ensured a lack of suspicion on the part of the Russians. Britain evaluated the tanks on their proving grounds and transferred one to the US, where the Americans evaluated it on the Aberdeen proving ground. While evaluating the vehicle, the US and UK are alleged to have noted any weak spots and flaws of the T-80U. In January 1994, British Minister of State for Defence Procurement Jonathan Aitken confirmed in parliamentary debates that a Russian T-80U tank was imported for defence research and development purposes. People's Republic of China. Some sources considers in late 1993 Russia signed a contract with the People's Republic of China for the sale of 200 T-80U MBTs for evaluation. Only 50 were delivered. Pakistan. Ukrainian exports of the T-80UD have been moderately successful. In 1993 and 1995 Ukraine demonstrated the tank to Pakistan, which was looking for a new main battle tank. The tank was tested in Pakistan, and in August 1996 Pakistan decided to buy 320 T-80UD tanks from Ukraine for $650 million in two variants, a standard OB Unite 478B and export OB Unite 478BE. The tanks were all supposed to be delivered in 1997. After the first batch of 15 vehicles were shipped in February 1997, Russia protested that it held the rights to the tank and that Ukraine couldn't export it. Nearly 70% of T-80UD components were produced outside of Ukraine, mainly in Russia. Under the guise of keeping good relations with India, one of its most important military customers, Russia withheld two A-46-2 125mm smoothbore guns, cast turrets, and other technology, which forced Ukraine to make its tank industry independent. It developed domestic components, including a welded turret which was in use on the new T-84. Ukraine was able to ship 20 more T-80UD tanks to Pakistan between February and May 1997. These 35 tanks were from Ukrainian army stocks of 52 T-80UDs. They were built in the Malyshev plant several years before but were not delivered to their original destination. Their capabilities were below the standard agreed by both Ukraine and Pakistan. The contract was completed by shipping another 285 Ukrainian T-80UD MBTs between 1997 and early 2002. These had the welded turret and other manufacturing features of the T-84. Cyprus. Cyprus is the first foreign country to officially obtain T-80 tanks. Russia sold 27 T-80U and 14 T-80UK for $174 million to Cyprus in 1996. The tanks arrived in two batches. The first shipment consisted of 27 T-80U MBTs arriving in 1996, while the second batch of 14 T-80UK MBTs arrived in 1997. This significantly improved the capabilities of Cypriot Army armored formations. Their most potent tank up until that point was the AMX-30B2. New tanks gave the Cypriot National Guard the edge in a possible confrontation with the Turkish army in northern Cyprus. In October 2009 Cyprus ordered an additional batch of 41 used T-80Us and T-80UKs from Russia for €115 million. Deliveries were completed in the first half of 2011. South Korea. South Korea was given 33 T-80U and 2 T-80UK tanks to pay Russian debts incurred during the days of the Soviet Union. The tanks came in three batches. The first consisted of 6 T-80Us in 1996, followed by 27 T-80Us in 1997, and finally 2 T-80UKs in 2005. Originally, 80 T-80Us were planned. As of 2016, these T-80Us are being retired due to cost and maintenance reasons. United States. The U.S. government obtained 1 T-80U from the United Kingdom. It was evaluated on the Aberdeen Proving Ground. In 2003, Ukraine transferred 4 T-80UD MBTs to the USA. Failed export attempts. Apart from Cyprus and the People's Republic of China, Russia has tried to export T-80 MBTs to Turkey and Greece, who were looking for new tanks. These two attempts have failed. Sweden regarded the T-80 an alternative for its mechanized brigades in the early 1990s should the Leclerc be adopted for her armored brigades, but since the new upgraded Leopard 2, STRV-122, was chosen, Leopard 2A4S, STRV-121, equipped the mechanized brigades as to simplify logistics. Operators. Under the Soviet Union, the T-80 was never exported. Only after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the T-80 was henceforth produced in Russia, was it exported. Current operators. Armenia, 20 in service. Belarus, there were 95 in service in 2069 in 2012 and 2015. Cyprus, 27 T-80Us and 14 T-80UKs were ordered in 1996 from Russia. In 2010, a further 27 T-80Us and 14 T-80UKs were delivered from Russian surplus. Egypt, 14 T-80UKs and 20 T-80Us purchased in 1997. Kazakhstan, 4 to 5 tanks, used for training in the military school of the city of Karaganda. Pakistan, 320 T-80UDS, OB Unite 478B and OB Unite 478BE, were ordered in 1996 from Ukraine and delivered between 1997 and 2002. People's Republic of China, ordered 200 T-80Us for evaluation in late 1993. 50 delivered. Tanks were not assigned to combat units. Research is used for the Type 96 tank. Russia, 3,144 in active service and around 1,856 in storage in 1995. 3,500 in active service in 1998. 3,058 in active service and 1,442 in stock in 2000. 4,500 in both active service and storage in 2005. 3,044 in active service and 1,456 in storage in 2008. 550 in active service and 3,000 in storage in 2016. South Korea, 33 T-80Us were ordered in 1995 from Russia and delivered between 1996 and 1997. 2 T-80UKs were acquired from Russia in 2005. Currently being retired due to cost and maintenance reasons. Moscow is currently trying to acquire them back from Seoul. Ukraine, 345 were in service in 1995, 273 in 2000, and 271 in 2005. Yemen, bought 31 from Russia in 2000. Bought 66 from Belarus. Former operators. Bulgaria, 4 T-80Us were bought during the late 1980s for evaluation but were rejected due to having no relative improvement over the T-72. The indigenous upgrade of Bulgarian T-72M to T-72M2 were a result of the technical information learned from evaluating the T-80S. Soviet Union, 1,900 in service in 1985, 4,000 in 1990 and 4,839 during the breakup of the USSR. All were passed on to successor states. Failed bids. Greece, T-80U took part in the tender for Greece, but lost against the Leopard 2A6. Malaysia, the T-80UD was offered to the Malaysian Army, but Malaysian chose the PT-91M Pendecker. Turkey, T-80U took part in the tender for Turkey, but lost against the Leopard 2A4. Type main battle tank. Place of origin Soviet Union. Service history. In service 1976 present. Used by sea operators. Wars: First Chechen War, Second Chechen War, War in Donbass. Production history. Designer Nikolai Popov, LKZ, T-80, KMDB, T-80UD. Designed 1967–1975. Manufacturer LKZ and Omsk Transmash, Russia. Malyshev Factory, Ukraine. Unit cost USD $2.2 million. T-80U export, 1994. PR.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.